The scent of fresh paint and lavender still clung to the air in the nursery, a room of soft greys and hopeful yellows. Marcia Smith stood frozen, one hand protectively cradling the swell of her 7-month pregnancy, the other clutching an ultrasound photo of their son. Her gaze was fixed on the iPad her husband had left on the changing table. The screen was still lit, displaying a chain of messages with a name she knew all too well, Ava Chen. Tonight was incredible. You're a world away from diapers and domesticity. The words blurred through her tears, each one a shard of glass in her heart. 6 months. The affair had been going on for 6 months. A quiet sob escaped her lips as the perfect world James Orsini had built for them shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The Chicago skyline glittered like a field of scattered diamonds outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. Earlier that morning, everything had felt perfect, a portrait of modern success. James Orsini, the self-made tech mogul who had clawed his way from a blue-collar neighborhood in Philly to the pinnacle of finance, was the sun around which their universe revolved. At 38, he possessed an empire, a ruthless reputation in the boardroom, and a beautiful wife who had willingly stepped back from her own promising career as an architect to build their home. Marcia traced the rim of her coffee mug, watching the sailboats glide across the vast, blue expanse of Lake Michigan. She had designed this space herself, a minimalist haven of warm woods, cool marble, and open air, a sanctuary from the city's relentless energy. Every corner was a testament to their shared dream, or so she had thought. "He's kicking again," she had said, her voice bright with the simple magic of it. "I think he's going to be a soccer player." James, already dressed in a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than her first car, had glanced up from his phone, his smile practiced but distant. "That's great, honey. Just make sure he doesn't scuff the floors." He'd kissed her forehead, a perfunctory gesture, his mind clearly 1,000 miles away, lost in algorithms and acquisition strategies. "I've got back-to-back meetings until late. Don't wait up. Don't forget, my appointment with Dr. Evans is at 4, she reminded him gently. "You promised you'd try to make this one." His eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite name, annoyance, before it was masked by a practiced look of concern. "Of course. I'll move heaven and earth. I've got it in my calendar." But now, hours later, the lie of that promise screamed at her from the iPad's glowing screen. "Forget the doctor. I've got a better way to check your pulse." Ava's message was time-stamped, 9:15 a.m., just moments after he had left. He had never intended to come. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The late-night board meetings, the sudden business trips to Singapore and London, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his shirts that he'd brushed off as something from the airport. The emotional chasm that had opened between them, which she had desperately tried to fill with talk of their son, their future, their home. She had excused his distance as the pressure of his work, the burden of a man carrying the world on his shoulders. What a fool she had been. He hadn't been carrying the world. He had been building a second one, a secret one where she and their unborn child had no place. Her mother's words from a phone call last week echoed in her mind. "Marcia, you sound tired. Is everything really okay? James is working so hard, but is he there for you?" She had defended him, of course. "He's just under a lot of stress, Mum. Building an empire isn't a 9-to-5 job." The irony was a bitter pill in her throat. He was building an empire, all right, but its foundations were rotten with deceit. Her hand trembled as she scrolled up, morbid curiosity compelling her to witness the full extent of the carnage. There were photos, James and Ava clinking champagne glasses on a private jet, their heads close together in a hotel bar in Soho. A selfie where Ava's hand rested possessively on his chest. They looked like a power couple, equals in ambition and appetite. A wave of nausea washed over her, more potent than any morning sickness she had endured. The power imbalance in her own marriage was suddenly starkly clear. She had given up her firm, her projects, her name, to become Mrs. Orsini, the graceful, supportive wife who curated their perfect life. In return, he had given her this gilded cage, and while she was nesting, he was out flying with someone else. Her breath hitched. The nursery, once a space of boundless joy and anticipation, now felt like a mausoleum. The tiny hand-knitted blanket from her grandmother draped over the crib seemed to mock her. The mobile of smiling whales and stars danced silently above, oblivious to the storm raging below. She sank onto the plush glider, the iPad falling from her numb fingers and clattering onto the hardwood floor. The sound was unnervingly loud in the cavernous silence of the penthouse. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was erased. For 6 months, her pregnancy, the most profound and vulnerable journey of her life, had been the backdrop to his sordid affair. Every gentle kick from their son, every moment of awe and fear she had shared with James, had been a lie he'd carried back to another woman's bed. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach, displacing the grief. She would not scream. She would not cry and throw things. A confrontation was what he would expect. He would weather her tears, deploy his arsenal of carefully worded apologies, and twist the narrative until she was the one who felt unreasonable. He was a master of control, of managing outcomes, but he had made one fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated the woman he married. He had forgotten that before she was his wife, Marcia Smith was a woman who knew how to build things and how to tear them down. The air in the private club was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive whiskey, and ambition. James Orsini swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking like a slow, steady heartbeat. Across the low-lit table, Ava Chen watched him, her eyes as sharp and calculating as the cut of her diamond earrings. She was a venture capitalist, a shark in a Chanel suit, and in the cutthroat world of Chicago finance, she was one of the few people James considered a true peer. "The board at Omnicorp is getting cold feet," she said, her voice a low purr. "They think your valuation is too aggressive. They need a little reassurance." "Reassurance is my specialty," James replied, a smirk playing on his lips. He thrived on this, the hunt, the negotiation, the subtle dance of power. It was clean, logical, a world of winners and losers, a world he understood. It was a world away from the one waiting for him at home. Lately, home had started to feel like an alien planet. It was a world of sonograms, color swatches for the nursery, and conversations about birthing plans. Marcia, once his partner in witty debates about politics and art, now spoke a language he couldn't comprehend. She spoke of trimesters and cravings, and a deep, visceral joy that felt utterly foreign to him. He loved her, of course he did. But the impending arrival of their son felt less like a blessing and more like an anchor, threatening to drag him down into a sea of domesticity he had spent his entire life trying to escape. His phone vibrated on the table. Marcia Smith. He let it go to voicemail. Ava raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Everything all right on the home front?" "Everything's perfect," he said, the lie tasting like ash. He pushed the thought of the doctor's appointment from his mind. It was just a checkup. Marcia was strong, capable. She didn't need him there. What she needed was for him to close this Omnicorp deal, to secure their future, to keep the gilded cage intact. It was the logic he used to justify everything. Ava leaned forward, her perfume a subtle, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and citrus. I heard you passed on the Nakatomi Tower project. Too risky. The question was a test, and he knew it. Too boring, he countered. I'm looking for disruption, not renovation. Good, she said, her knee brushing his under the table, because I have something for you, something disruptive. She slid a folder across the table. It was a stealth startup in the biotech space, a company with the potential to revolutionize gene therapy. It was brilliant, audacious, and wildly undervalued. They're looking for a lead investor, a silent partner, someone with vision. The thrill of the chase surged through him, a familiar, welcome high. This was what he was built for. This was real. The abstract concept of a son, of a family, paled in comparison to the tangible victory of a deal like this. Ava understood that part of him, the relentless, hungry part that Marcia had tried to soothe. Ava didn't soothe. She sharpened. You're a world away from diapers and domesticity, he'd texted her earlier, and he'd meant it. With her, he wasn't an expectant father. He was James Orsini, titan of industry. He felt seen, desired for the power he wielded, not for the stability he could provide. His phone buzzed again, a text this time. Just checking in. Hope the meeting is going well. The baby's heart rate is perfect. Strong, just like his dad. Love you. A wave of guilt, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the adrenaline. He quickly typed back, Great news. Meeting is running long. We'll be late. Love you too. Another lie, stacked upon the last. He rationalized it. He was protecting her from the stress of his world. It was for the best. So, Ava said, her voice dropping, drawing him back in. Are you in? He looked at her, at the gleam in her eyes that mirrored his own ambition. She was a reflection of the man he had been before the penthouse, before the marriage, before the baby. She was the escape hatch. I'm in, he said, his decision sealing more than just a business deal. Hours later, they were in her apartment in the Gold Coast, a sterile, modern space that felt more like a showroom than a home. The folder lay forgotten on her coffee table. The pretense of business had dissolved with the second bottle of wine. Her lips were on his, her hands unbuttoning his shirt, and he was sinking into the familiar oblivion of forbidden passion. It wasn't about love. He knew that. It wasn't even about desire, not really. It was about control. In his world, he controlled the variables. He mitigated the risks. Fatherhood was the ultimate unknown, a variable he couldn't model or predict. It terrified him in a way no billion-dollar deal ever could. His own father had been a ghost in his childhood, a man defined by his absence, leaving behind a legacy of emotional distance that James had sworn he would never repeat. Yet here he was, running from the very responsibility he feared, becoming something worse than a ghost, a liar. In the heat of the moment, with Ava's laughter echoing in the room, a calculated corporate sound, he silenced the nagging voice in his head. He chose the thrill of the immediate, the hollow victory of conquest over the profound, terrifying, and sacred promise he had made to his wife. He was lost in the intoxicating illusion of power, completely unaware that his real world, the one that truly mattered, was already gone. The silence in the penthouse was a living entity. It pressed in on Marcia from all sides, amplifying the frantic thumping of her own heart. For an hour, she had sat on the glider in the nursery, trapped in a paralysis of shock and grief. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, the ice in her veins began to melt, replaced by a slow-burning rage. A heated confrontation would be a performance for his benefit. Her tears would be a currency he would use to buy her forgiveness. Her anger would be a storm he could patiently wait out. No, that was the old script, and she was tearing it up. Her response would not be an emotional outburst, it would be a strategic retreat. A vanishing act. With a newfound chilling clarity, she stood up. She walked into their master bedroom, a sprawling space with a panoramic view of the city he had conquered. The room smelled of him, of his expensive cologne, of the crisp linens he insisted upon. She went to their walk-in closet, a space larger than her first apartment. His side was a meticulous display of tailored suits and designer shoes. Her side, once filled with her own power suits and architectural drawings, was now dominated by soft maternity wear. She pulled out a single suitcase, a sturdy, practical one she'd used for site visits back when she had a career. With trembling but determined hands, she began to pack. Essentials only. Comfortable clothes, her prenatal vitamins, the small, leather-bound journal her father had given her. She packed the ultrasound photos, tucking them safely between layers of sweaters. He hadn't even bothered to look at the latest one. Her eyes fell on the velvet box on her nightstand. Inside, the diamond necklace he had given her for their 3rd anniversary glittered mockingly. She left it. She left the designer handbags, the expensive shoes, all the trappings of the life he had provided. They were not gifts. They were chains. She walked back to the nightstand and slipped off her wedding ring. The platinum band, engraved with the date he had promised to love and cherish her forever, felt cold and foreign against her skin. She placed it deliberately in the center of his pillow, a silent, damning statement. There would be no letter of explanation. The empty space beside him in their bed would say more than words ever could. Her phone buzzed. It was her mother, Carol. She let it go to voicemail, knowing her voice would betray her. She couldn't bear the questions, the worry. Not yet. Instead, she opened a text message to her father, Robert. His number was under Dad, a simple, steadfast title. "Can you pick me up from the Amtrak station in Saugatuck? Arriving around 11 p.m. I'll explain everything when I get there. Please don't tell Mom yet. I need you." The response was almost immediate. "I'll be there, sweetheart. Whatever you need." A single tear rolled down her cheek, but it was a tear of relief, not sorrow. Her father had always been her rock, a quiet, gentle man who built beautiful furniture with his hands and had taught her that a person's true worth was in their integrity, not their net worth. James, with all his millions, was bankrupt in the ways that mattered. She took one last look around the penthouse. It was a beautiful, hollow masterpiece, a monument to a man's ambition, but not a home. Not anymore. She had tried to breathe life into its sterile walls, to fill it with love and warmth, but she was trying to build on a foundation of lies. Architects know better than anyone that a structure with a compromised foundation is doomed to collapse. With her suitcase in hand, she walked to the door. She didn't look back. The private elevator descended smoothly, whisking her away from the gilded cage in the sky. As she stepped out into the cool evening air of Chicago's Gold Coast, the doorman tipped his hat. "Good evening, Mrs. Orsini." "It's Smith," she said, her voice clear and steady. Marcia Smith. She slipped into the back of a waiting car service she'd ordered, the driver already programmed with the destination, Union Station. As the car pulled away from the curb, she watched the magnificent skyscraper that housed her former life recede in the rearview mirror until it was just another glittering spire in a city of them. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the reassuring flutter of her son. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered into the darkness. "We're going home." The train pulled out of the station exactly on time, its powerful horn a mournful cry that echoed her own heartbreak. But as the city lights blurred into a distant constellation, a different feeling began to take root. Freedom. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. For the first time in a long time, Marcia Smith was the sole architect of her own life. James Orsini walked into the penthouse a little after midnight, a triumphant hum still vibrating under his skin. The deal with Ava was unofficially sealed, and the night had been a potent cocktail of power and passion. He loosened his tie, the familiar weight of exhaustion and victory settling upon him. He expected to find Marcia asleep, the soft glow of a lamp on her bedside table as she read one of her pregnancy books. Instead, he was met with an unnerving silence, a deep, profound quiet that the sprawling apartment never truly possessed. "Marcia!" he called out, his voice echoing in the marble entryway. No answer. A flicker of annoyance sparked within him. Was she angry that he was so late? He'd sent a text. He walked into the living room. Her favorite cashmere throw was folded neatly on the sofa, not tossed aside as she usually left it. The prenatal vitamins were gone from the kitchen counter. A small, cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. He moved quickly to their bedroom. The lights were off. "Honey, are you asleep?" he asked, his voice softer now. He flipped the switch and the room flooded with light. The bed was empty, the sheets on her side perfectly smooth, as if she had never been there at all. And then he saw it. Sitting in the center of his pristine white pillow was her wedding ring. The sight stole the air from his lungs. The platinum band glinted under the recessed lighting, a small silver indictment. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a cry for attention. It was a declaration. "No," he breathed, the word a raw whisper. He stumbled backward, his mind refusing to process the scene. This wasn't possible. This wasn't part of the plan. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling as he dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Marcia. Please leave a message." Her cheerful, recorded voice was a cruel mockery. He tried again, and again. Straight to voicemail every time. He called her mother's house in Michigan. No answer. Her friends in the city, one by one. Each call ended the same way. Confusion, concern, and no answers. His heart hammered against his ribs as he raced through the apartment like a madman. He threw open the doors to her closet. A cavernous gap stared back at him. Her comfortable clothes, her maternity jeans, her sensible shoes, all gone. The suitcase she favored was missing. But the expensive gowns, the designer heels, the jewelry he'd lavished upon her, remained, hanging like ghosts of the woman he thought he owned. The reality of the situation crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just left for the night. She had vanished. She had meticulously excised herself from his life, taking only what was truly hers and leaving behind the hollow shell of their marriage. He sank onto the edge of their bed, his head in his hands. The silence he had craved, the escape from domesticity he had sought in Ava's arms, was now a suffocating presence. The penthouse, his throne in the sky, felt like a tomb. Every object in the room screamed her absence. The book on her nightstand, the scent of her lotion lingering in the air, the soft indentation on her side of the sofa. His mind replayed their last conversation, her gentle reminder about the doctor's appointment, his casual, dismissive promise, the loving text message he had ignored. He had been so consumed by his own desires, his own fears, that he hadn't seen the fracture lines spreading right beneath his feet. He had treated her love as a given, a stable asset in his portfolio of success, while he gambled it away on risky ventures. He thought of his son. Their son. a baby he had never felt kick, whose heartbeat he had only heard about second-hand. Marcia was 7 months pregnant, carrying his child, and she was out there somewhere, alone. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. What had he done? His phone buzzed. A message from Ava. Still thinking about tonight. You're a king, James. He stared at her name, and for the first time, the sight of it filled him with a profound revulsion. King? He was a king of nothing. He had been sitting on an empty throne in a fool's paradise. He picked up Marcia's ring, its weight insignificant in his palm, yet heavier than anything he had ever held. It was the symbol of a promise he hadn't just broken, but had pulverized. As the city lights pulsed on, indifferent to the unraveling of his world, James Orsini faced the horrifying truth. In his relentless pursuit of everything he thought he wanted, power, freedom, control, he had lost the only thing that had ever truly mattered. And he had no one to blame but himself. The fresh, clean scent of Lake Michigan, so different from the polluted air of Chicago, filled Marcia's lungs. Saugatuck, Michigan, welcomed her not with open arms, but with a quiet, steady embrace. Her childhood home, a sturdy craftsman her father had built himself, nestled among towering maple trees, stood as a fortress against the chaos she had fled. Her father, Robert Smith, had been waiting at the train station as promised. He hadn't bombarded her with questions. He simply took her suitcase, wrapped her in a fierce, protective hug that smelled of sawdust and integrity, and whispered, "You're home now. You're safe." 2 weeks had passed, in a gentle blur of healing. Her mother, Carol, a woman with a will of iron disguised by a gardener's gentle hands, had transformed Marcia's old bedroom into a serene sanctuary. She had cried, of course, when Marcia finally told her everything, but her tears quickly gave way to a quiet fury directed squarely at James. Since that day, Carol had become her daughter's shield. "He's called again," Carol said one morning, her tone carefully neutral as she placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Marcia. "5th time this morning. His parents have called twice as well. The Orsinis are in a full-blown panic." Marcia focused on buttering her toast, her hand not quite steady. "What did you tell them?" "The truth," Carol said, sitting down opposite her. "That you are safe. The baby is safe, and that you are not ready to speak with anyone. I told his mother that when her son learns the meaning of respect, her daughter-in-law might reconsider. I believe that's the last we'll hear from her for a while." A small, watery smile touched Marcia's lips. Her mother was a warrior. But the reprieve felt temporary. The world James inhabited, a world of lawyers and relentless pressure, would not be held at bay forever. "Sweetheart," Robert said, entering the kitchen with the morning paper. He placed a gentle hand on Marcia's shoulder. "We'll protect you for as long as you need. But you need to start thinking about what comes next. For you, and for this little guy." He nodded toward her belly. He was right. Hiding in her parents' home wasn't a long-term solution. She was an architect, a planner. She needed a blueprint for her new life. That afternoon, while her mother was at her book club, Marcia sat at her father's heavy oak desk and opened her laptop for the first time since she'd left Chicago. Her personal email was an avalanche of frantic messages from James. "Marcia, please, just tell me you're safe. I was a fool. I'll do anything. I'm so sorry. I can't live without you." The words were hollow, predictable. They were the desperate pleas of a man who had lost control and was scrambling to get it back. She deleted them all without a second thought. Then she opened her professional email account. It was a ghost town, dormant for the better part of a year. But as she scrolled through old messages, a spark ignited. There were notes from former clients, colleagues praising her old designs. It was a reminder of a time when her identity wasn't tied to a man's last name. She was Marsha Smith, the architect who had won the Young Designers Award for her work on sustainable community housing. A new email pinged at the top of her inbox. The subject line read, "Saugatuck Community Project." It was from the town council. They were looking for an architect to design a new lakefront library and community centre, a project focused on eco-friendly materials and harmony with the natural landscape. They were looking for someone with local roots and a modern vision. Her heart beat a little faster. It wasn't a skyscraper in a major metropolis, but it was real. It was meaningful. It was a chance to build something beautiful and lasting from the ground up. It was a chance to rebuild herself. That evening, a sleek black car she didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. Her stomach clenched. James. He had found her. Her father met him on the porch before he could even ring the bell. Through the screen door, Marsha watched the confrontation. James looked terrible. He was gaunt, his expensive suit rumpled, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "She's not ready to see you, James," Robert said, his voice low but unyielding. He stood with his arms crossed, a simple carpenter blocking the path of a millionaire. "Robert, please," James's voice cracked. "I just need to know she's okay. I need to see her. She's safe. The baby is safe. That's all you need to know right now," Robert replied. "You had your chance to be there for her, and you chose to be somewhere else. Actions have consequences. Showing up here unannounced isn't going to fix anything. It's just another selfish act. Go home. Respect her space. It's the only currency you have left." James stood there for a long moment, defeated. He finally nodded, his shoulders slumping, and walked back to his car. Marsha watched from the window as he drove away, a storm of conflicting emotions warring within her. Part of her felt a shred of pity for the broken man he appeared to be. But the larger part, the part that remembered the cold indifference of his betrayal, knew her father was right. This was not a fortress of silence meant to punish him. It was a space of healing, meant to save herself. James's world, once a finely tuned machine of his own making, was now a chaotic mess of malfunctioning parts. His corner office, with its commanding view of the city, felt like a prison. The framed photo of Marsha on his desk, her radiant smile at their wedding, was a daily torment. He'd lost weight. He barely slept. His legendary focus was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. He'd finally broken things off with Ava in a short, brutal phone call. She'd been dismissive, almost amused by his domestic drama. Her lack of empathy was chilling. "Honestly, James," she'd scoffed, "she'll come back. They always do. Now, about that biotech deal." He had hung up on her, the sound of her voice making him physically ill. How had he ever found her calculating coldness attractive? His company, Orsini Capital, was suffering. His partners were noticing his disengagement, his erratic behavior. Rumors were swirling. He had built his reputation on being unflappable, a man who could see 10 moves ahead. Now, he couldn't even see a path through the current day. The true reversal, the blow that would shatter the last vestiges of his ego, came a week later. He was in a board meeting for the Omnicorp acquisition, the deal he had been celebrating with Ava the night Marsha left. The CEO of Omnicorp, a grizzled veteran named Marcus Thorne, looked at him with undisguised contempt. "The deal is off, Orsini," Marcus said bluntly. "We're going with a counteroffer from Blackwood Venture." James was stunned. Blackwood was Ava Chen's firm. "Their offer can't possibly be better than ours. We have the inside track." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, you had the inside track, all right. And it seems you shared it." Blackwood came in with a proposal that specifically addressed every single one of our board's private concerns, concerns we only ever voiced to you. They knew our exact pain points and our bottom line. It's almost as if someone handed them our playbook. The blood drained from James's face. The private conversations with Ava, the confidential details he had shared, pillow talk he had mistaken for intimacy. She hadn't been his partner. She hadn't been his equal. She had been his rival, and she had been playing him from the very beginning. The affair wasn't just a dalliance. It was corporate espionage. He had sacrificed his marriage for a woman who had used him as a pawn to humiliate him and poach the biggest deal of his career. The irony was devastating. He, James Orsini, the master manipulator, had been played for a fool. The walk back to his office was the longest of his life. The whispers of his colleagues followed him down the hall. He closed his door, sank into his chair, and for the first time since Marcia left, he wept. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of profound, gut-wrenching shame. He finally saw it all with horrifying clarity. His entire life had become a hollow performance. He wasn't a titan. He was an insecure boy from Philly, terrified that someone would discover he didn't belong. He'd used money and power as a shield, and he'd used Marcia's unconditional love as a safety net he never thought would break. And Ava? He had been drawn to her because she was just as broken and ruthless as he was. That afternoon, he did two things. First, he called his lawyer and began the process of selling his majority stake in Orsini Capital. The money, the power, the reputation, it was all meaningless. A currency that couldn't buy back his soul. Second, he found the number for a therapist, a highly recommended psychiatrist specializing in narcissistic personality traits and trauma. The irony wasn't lost on him. He made an appointment for the next day. He was at rock bottom, stripped of his professional pride and his personal life. It was a terrifying place to be. But in the rubble of his imploded world, for the first time, he felt a flicker of something real. The humbling, painful, and necessary process of tearing himself down had begun. He had to understand why. Why had he sabotaged the only good thing in his life? The answer, he knew, was buried deep within him, in a past he had tried to outrun. The therapy sessions would be an excavation, and he was terrified of what he might find. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was his only way back, not to Marcia, but to himself. The next 3 months were a brutal education in humility. James traded his Chicago penthouse for a sterile corporate apartment in the suburbs. His days were no longer filled with high-stakes meetings, but with long, grueling therapy sessions with a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Miller. She peeled back the layers of his carefully constructed persona with surgical precision. They talked about his father, the man who provided for his family financially, but was an emotional void, who taught James that a man's worth was measured by his paycheck, not his presence. James came to understand that his affair with Ava wasn't about sex or passion. It was a desperate flight from intimacy and responsibility. He had been terrified of becoming a father because he had no blueprint for being a good one. So, he had subconsciously sabotaged his own happiness, recreating the emotional distance of his childhood under the guise of ambition. It was a painful, ugly truth to confront. He made no attempt to contact Marcia directly, respecting the boundary her father had set. He learned through a mutual acquaintance that she had taken on a local architecture project. The news brought a pang of both pride and sorrow. She was rebuilding her life without him, as she should. One crisp autumn evening, as he was staring out his apartment window at a world that no longer felt like his phone rang. The caller ID read, Robert Smith. James's heart leapt into his throat. he answered, his voice unsteady. "Hello? James, it's Robert." The older man's voice was gruff, devoid of warmth, but also of the sharp anger from their last encounter. "Marcia doesn't know I'm calling, and Carol would have my head if she knew. But I see my daughter every day. She's strong, but she's carrying more than just a baby. She's carrying the weight of this whole mess." James listened, holding his breath. "I've been a husband for 40 years, Robert continued. "Marriage isn't about perfection, it's about repair. But you can't repair something with empty apologies. She's seen men like you before, men who say they're sorry when they get caught. What she hasn't seen is what you're doing to change the man you are." "I'm in therapy," James said quietly. "I sold my company. I'm trying." There was a long pause. "Good," Robert said, the single word carrying a surprising weight. "Then write her a letter. Not an email. A real letter. Don't fill it with excuses or promises. Tell her what you've learned about yourself. Tell her the truth about your fears. She needs to hear it. Not for you. For her. So she can close this chapter, one way or another, before the baby comes." The line went dead. Robert's call was not an olive branch. It was a challenge, a chance to prove he was capable of one truly honest act. That night, James sat at a simple desk with a pen and paper. He wrote and rewrote, crumpling sheet after sheet. Finally, near dawn, the words came. He wrote not of his love for her, but of his failure to love himself. He wrote about his father, his fear, and the profound emptiness that had driven him to betray the one person who saw the good in him. "I'm not writing to ask for your forgiveness," he concluded. "I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing because I finally understand what I broke. Not just our marriage, but my own integrity. Our son deserves a father who is fighting to be better, and I promise you I am fighting. I will wait, and I will continue to do the work, for as long as it takes." He sealed the letter and sent it via overnight courier, with no expectation of a reply. 2 days later, his phone rang in the middle of the night. It was an unknown number from a Michigan area code. He answered immediately. "James?" It was Carol, Marcia's mother. Her voice was strained, urgent. "It's Marcia. She's in labor. Her water broke an hour ago." James's world tilted on its axis. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" "Things are moving fast. She read your letter this morning." There was a pause, and James could hear the conflict in Carol's voice. "This is her decision, not mine. She said, if you want to be there for your son's birth, you have 3 hours to get to Saugatuck General. Don't you dare make her regret this." He was out the door before she finished the sentence, car keys in hand. The letter forgotten on his desk, the therapy sessions, the months of painful self-reflection. It had all been leading to this single moment. This wasn't about a second chance for his marriage. It was about his first and only chance to show up as a father. As he sped through the dark, empty highways, every mile brought him closer to a reckoning and the terrifying, hopeful beginning of a new life. The fluorescent lights of Saugatuck General Hospital felt harsh and sterile after the darkness of the highway. James burst through the emergency room doors, his coat still damp with the cool night air, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The 3-hour drive had passed in a 2-hour blur of adrenaline and prayer. "I'm here for Marcia Smith," he said to the nurse at the reception desk, his voice breathless. "I'm the father." The nurse gave him a long, appraising look before nodding toward the elevators. "3rd floor, maternity. They're waiting for you." The elevator ride felt like an eternity. What if he was too late? What if she had changed her mind? The doors opened to reveal Robert, his face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and apprehension. "She's asking for you," Robert said, his expression unreadable. "But let me be clear. This is for her and the baby. The moment you cause her any distress, you're out. Understood?" "Completely," James said, his voice raw. He pushed open the door to room 304, and the world slowed down. Marcia was propped up against a mountain of pillows, her face flushed and beaded with sweat, her beautiful features tight with pain. But she was magnificent. A warrior. Carol was beside her, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. Both women looked up as he entered, and the air crackled with the weight of unspoken history. "You came," Marcia whispered, her voice hoarse. "I wouldn't be anywhere else," he said, staying near the door, terrified of crossing an invisible boundary. Another contraction racked her body, and a pained gasp escaped her lips. Instinct took over. He moved to her other side, opposite her mother. Marcia's hand shot out and gripped his with a strength that surprised him. The simple, desperate touch after months of separation was an anchor in the storm. He held on, letting her squeeze as hard as she needed, channeling every ounce of his regret and hope into that simple connection. As the contraction subsided, her eyes met his, and for the first time, she truly saw him. The designer suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled sweater and worn jeans. The confident swagger of the millionaire had been replaced by the haunted, humbled look of a penitent. "Your letter," she breathed. "Mom brought it. I read it." "It doesn't matter now," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Nothing matters but this. Right here." A quiet understanding passed between her parents. Carol squeezed her daughter's shoulder, and she and Robert slipped out of the room, giving them a fragile bubble of privacy. "I'm scared," Marcia admitted, her vulnerability a fresh wound. "Me too," he answered honestly. "But you're the strongest person I know. You've already proven that." The next few hours were a primal blur of pain, encouragement, and sheer force of will. James never left her side. He breathed with her, held her up, and whispered words of encouragement, his voice a steady presence in the chaotic symphony of childbirth. He wasn't her husband in that room. He wasn't the man who had betrayed her. He was simply her partner, bearing witness to a miracle he had nearly forfeited. And then, with one final, heroic push from Marcia, the room was filled with the loud, furious cry of a new life. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, perfect infant onto Marcia's chest. Time stopped. James stared, overwhelmed, as Marcia laughed through her tears, touching their son's damp hair. "Hello, little one," she whispered. He was a miracle, a testament to a love that had existed before the lies, a love that had, against all odds, created this perfect being. With a nod from Marcia, James shakily cut the umbilical cord, severing the physical tie, but feeling an invisible, unbreakable one snap firmly into place. Later, after the nurses had cleaned up, and the proud grandparents had returned, Marcia made a quiet request. "Do you want to hold him?" He looked at her, his eyes asking for a permission he didn't deserve. She simply nodded, and with infinite care, she transferred their son into his arms. The baby was so light, yet he carried the weight of the entire world. He had Marcia's eyes. "I was thinking of a name," Marcia said softly from the bed. "Leo, it means lion, for strength." "Leo," James repeated, the name feeling sacred on his tongue. "Leo Orsini." As he said it, the baby yawned, his tiny hand wrapping around James's finger. In that small, powerful grip, James felt the first glimmer of redemption. He looked at Marcia, her face exhausted but glowing. He opened his mouth to say something. "I'm sorry, I love you. I'll fix this." But she stopped him. "Not now, James. she said gently, but with a firm edge. Not today. Today is for him. He nodded, understanding completely. Today was the first day of their son's life, and perhaps, if he was very, very lucky, it could also be the first day of his own. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was illuminated by a single, brilliant ray of hope. 6 months later, spring had breathed new life into the small town of Saugatuck. The ruthless tech mogul James Orsini was gone, replaced by a man who found purpose in assembling a crib and mastering the perfect temperature for a bottle. He lived in a small rented cottage by the river and worked remotely as a consultant, his schedule dictated by his son's needs. Marcia Smith, meanwhile, was thriving. She had launched her own architectural firm, Smith & Associates, specializing in sustainable design, and her library project was already winning acclaim. She had reclaimed her name, her career, and her power. Their lives were separate but intertwined by the love for their son, Leo. James's visits, once supervised, were now relaxed afternoons at the park. He had shown up every single day. He had done the work. One sunny afternoon, as they watched Leo take a wobbly step on the grass, Marcia turned to him. "I'm getting coffee downtown tomorrow morning," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes holding a deeper meaning. "If you're free, I'd like to talk about us, about who we are now." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. But it was a beginning. A new blueprint, drawn on a foundation of hard-earned trust and the resilient strength of a woman who had walked through fire and rebuilt a better life on the other side. The journey of Marcia and James is a powerful reminder that sometimes the deepest betrayals can lead to the most profound transformations. If you were moved by their story of resilience and the difficult road to a second chance, please hit the like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of personal growth. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the complexities of the human heart. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. The house smelled like lemons and steam when Victor Hale realized what was missing. The kettle whistled, the nursery light pulsed a soft moon blue, and the note on the kitchen island sat under Nora's wedding ring, cool against the stone, like a dare. "Don't look for me. Protect our baby. If you love me, deliver this to the attorney in the envelope." Under the note, a flash drive the size of a dime gleamed like a secret. By the time the kettle screamed itself hoarse, Victor understood 3 things. Nora was gone. Someone had hurt her long before she left, and whatever was on that drive was going to hurt him too. Victor didn't drink the tea. He stared at the ring, the way the diamond swallowed the light, and called Nora's phone until her voicemail turned metallic and cold. The baby's ultrasound photo, 10 weeks along, was still clipped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like Mount Rainier. Seattle rain drummed the windows. Outside, the Hale house on Mercer Island looked exactly the way the glossy magazines had photographed it the previous spring. Cedar and glass, all that success reflecting back at itself. Nora Bennett had been meticulous even when she was messy. The sink was lined with rinsed mugs, as if she'd set them in a row and then lost interest. Her work bag, pale canvas darkened at the corners, was gone. Her spare keys missing. In the nursery they'd only half finished. The pine crib leaned against the wall like a ship's hull, and the stuffed otter they'd picked out at University Village lay belly up on the carpet. He took the flash drive and slid it into his pocket. With emotion, he told himself, felt protective, not furtive. The envelope was addressed to a name he knew, Ray Okoye, attorney at law, and a downtown address on 3rd Avenue. He knew Ray from a panel 2 years earlier on corporate governance. She had asked crisp questions about the ethics of M&A deals. He had answered like a man who loved the sound of his own confidence. His car, an electric sedan he could start from his phone, greeted him with heated seats and a soft chime. He drove off the island, wind gusting off the black water of Lake Washington, the bridge lights winking like a lie told by a calm face. He tried to call Ray at the red light by the I-5 on-ramp and failed to leave a coherent message. "Victor?" Her voice cut in a minute later, warm and alert, as if she'd been listening at the line for years. "Tell me you have the envelope." "I have it," he said. "Nora's gone." A beat. "Come to my office now." He glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, he saw himself as the papers like to paint him. Victor Hale, founder of Halcyon Partners, angel investor, keynote speaker, husband in a tailored life. But under the title, he looked like a man who had fallen asleep in someone else's house and woken up without the exits marked. By the time he parked on 3rd, rain whipped hard enough to sting. He clutched the envelope like it might decide to float away. Ray's office was on the 14th floor of an older building that still had brass numbers and an elevator with a sigh. A receptionist with a tidy bun offered him a towel. "Ms. Okoye is waiting," she said, sliding open a door. Ray was shorter than he remembered, or perhaps the last time he'd seen her he'd been taller from arrogance. She wore a navy dress and a cardigan the color of fog. Her eyes went immediately to the envelope. "Nora told me she might send you," she said, waving him into a seat. I didn't believe her. "She didn't send." He stopped. "She left. She left a note. She said to deliver this to you, and there's a flash drive." Ray took the envelope like a midwife might take a newborn, familiar with fragility, unimpressed with panic. She slit it with a small silver opener. 2 things slid out: a typed letter and a printout of what looked like bank transfers, columns of numbers marching like soldiers. "She said you'd try to call me," Ray said, eyes scanning the letter. "But she also said not to trust your phone. Victor, breathe. Whatever you think you know about your marriage, set it aside for a minute. I need to plug in that drive." He handed it over. "Is Nora in danger?" Ray met his gaze. "You tell me." He sat back as she inserted the drive into a laptop that had a ring of tiny scratches around each port. A machine used often, a machine that had seen panicked people. A folder populated on the screen: Mercer PR, Sloan, Invoices, Audio, St. Augustine Holdings, Shadow Ledger. He swallowed. "St. Augustine," he murmured. "That's your biggest client," Ray said, "and the firm your acquaintance runs the PR for." "Sloan," he said, the name like a bad taste. Sloan Mercer, bright, strategic, relentless. The woman who had once laughed in his kitchen and pinned her hair with his cufflink because the clasp on her barrette had broken. The woman whose texts Nora had pretended not to see. The woman he had told himself was a mistake he would never repeat, and then did. Ray clicked on an audio file. A voice filled the room, low and smoky. Sloane's. "He'll fold if he thinks the press will go for the baby angle. He's soft there. She's soft there. We can get the board to nudge him to sell if we freeze her out socially first. Look, I'll get Nora to sign without reading. She trusts me." Or she did. Victor's hands went cold. Another voice, male, slid in. "And the defamation suit? Filed. I'll win. People want a villain with pretty hair. They'll pick the pregnant one." Ray paused the audio. The room hummed with fluorescent light. "There's more," she said. Much more. He thought of the otter on the carpet. He thought of Nora's hand on her belly, absently rubbing circles while she read. He pressed his thumb hard into the line of his jaw, looking for a pain that might replace the one swelling in his chest. "Where is she?" he asked quietly. Ray's expression softened. "Safe, I hope." She wrote that she needed time, and that this was the only way to force the truth into daylight. Victor, your wife didn't disappear into nothing. She left you a map. Nora had met Victor 6 years before at a fundraiser in Fremont, under strings of bistro lights and a ceiling of spider plants. She was 30 then, a librarian who had learned to be good with people who loved stories for their own reasons. He was 35, a man whose suits matched the gleam of his watch, but who laughed in a way that felt unpracticed, like he was surprised that joy had snuck up on him. They had built a life that walked the line between humble and glossy. Coffee at Milstead, Sunday hikes in Discovery Park, take-out Thai boxes set on wedding china when friends dropped in. He had kissed her palms the night he told her about his childhood, the tiny apartment in Tacoma, the mother who'd worked 2 jobs and taught him to iron at 8 because there's power in putting creases where you want them to go, not where they happen, and the father who had taught him nothing but how to leave. But even in the golden part, there were shadows. Parties where women in silk with expensive sighs asked Nora too many questions about when she planned to step out of the workforce. Work trips that were both longer than planned and less accounted for. Nights when Victor turned into a version of himself who belonged to the ecosystem of deals and strategic leaks, a weather system Nora couldn't predict. When Sloane came along, savvy, capable, quicker with Victor than anyone, Nora told herself it was harmless. Sloane managed narratives for a living. She made bad facts look tidy. That winter, an influencer posted photos of Victor at a charity gala, Sloane's hand at his elbow. The caption, innocent almost, set fire to comments. Nora saw the photo, stared at the way Sloane leaned in, as if there were things only she could hear. She put her phone face down. She adopted a habit of going to bed first, and of waking up to find Victor on the couch with the TV glowing like a third party in their marriage. Their efforts to conceive had made the air thin around them. Clinic appointments. A chart Nora kept on the fridge that Victor pretended to understand. A miscarriage at 7 weeks that Nora email announced to the world as taking a few days. And no one asked why the transplant spider plant on her desk had browned and died. When she finally became pregnant again, Nora started a private journal on her old laptop, the one with the E key that sometimes stuck. She wrote to the baby like she had to the kids she'd read to at the library, full of hope and practical details. You will hate the smell of microwaved salmon, and the admission that she wanted to stay herself and still become new. If her handwriting looked shaky, she told herself it was hormones, not fear. On a Wednesday in March, she found the envelope on the porch. No return address. Inside, printouts of emails she recognized. Sloane to a magazine editor. CCing a board member Nora had eaten salmon with at a long table at Canlis. Sloane to a reporter she followed. Sloane to Victor. The last one was the kind of message people wrote when they had become proud of their own cruelty. You said you wanted to modernize the company's image. That means moving past, whatever she is. We can do that together. Nora sat with the pages for an hour and then another. She put them back in the envelope and hid it in the linen closet behind the extra-fitted sheet no one ever used. She made dinner. She asked Victor about his day. She watched the tiny flicker of their baby's heartbeat on the ultrasound screen the next morning and did not cry in front of the tech. 2 days later, Ray Okoye called from a number Nora didn't know. I'm a friend of a friend, Ray said, and frankly, a woman who likes the idea of not letting men with perfect hair run the board forever. Do you have time to talk? Nora had time. She had more time than she was supposed to have, and a clock she could hear in her blood. Victor followed Ray's finger as she navigated through the files. There were screenshots of Sloane's invoicing system, backups of backups owed to a sloppy assistant or a meticulous saboteur, showing billings to St. Augustine for reputational risk mitigation, including line items that read like tiny crimes, leverage personal narratives of spouse, coordinate concerned friend, statements via influencers, discredit whistleblower via college roommate network. There were audio files recorded with the crisp distance of a phone on a table. Sloane's voice again. A different man this time, smooth, unplaceable. We need him to believe he's saving his reputation, not choosing me. He always thinks he's saving someone, Sloane said. It's his kink. Victor flinched. Ray switched to the shadow ledger. This, she said, is the kind of thing that makes sympathetic judges reconsider their sympathy. Off-book payments, shell companies, the works. But also this. Look. She opened a folder labeled KC Clinic. Someone paid a nurse to access Nora's medical records. Jesus, Victor muttered. Who? The IP addresses tie back to a WeWork near your office. Ray's face was drawn. This isn't just infidelity. It's coercion and surveillance. It's a campaign. Victor gripped the arm of the chair. Somewhere in the building, a copier churned. Indifferent. He had known, of course. On some level you do not love a woman like Nora, and not feel, in your bones, the air change when a storm has formed offshore. But he hadn't known it had names and timestamps. Where's the original of this? He asked, voice low. On the drive is a copy, Ray said. The original is safe. Redundancies exist. Nora planned this after the first envelope. She wrote me in late March, said she thought she was losing pieces of herself, a surveillance of the soul. I told her to come in. She sent this instead and then came in. She met you? He felt dizzy with gratitude and dread. Ray nodded. She didn't bring everything at once. That part is smart. She was frightened, but there was steel in it. She said she needed to leave before anyone moved the game onto a board she didn't understand. She gave me her timeline. She also... Ray hesitated. Victor, she asked me to tell you something if you came. But I need you to hear it without defensiveness. I'll try. She said you're not a monster. You're a man who learned that power could make love feel safer. She said she believes you will choose better when the noise is gone. But she can't be the noise. Not anymore. Victor looked down at his hands. His wedding band had a faint nick near the edge, a small imperfection he'd never noticed. He swallowed. What do we do? He asked. Ray leaned back. We file, not against you. Against St. Augustine and Ms. Mercer. We seek a protective order for Nora, even though she's gone, using what she's provided. We alert the clinic and the medical board about the breach. We put one of these audio files in a motion under seal so it exists in the world in a way that can't be erased, and then, when they push back, we go public. Carefully. And me? He asked. You, Ray said. Go home. Pack a bag. Not to run. To prepare. I need statements and dates. I need to know what Sloane could blackmail you with. I need you to call your mother and tell her you will be out of pocket for a while. He blinked. My mother? Ray smiled briefly. Trust me. You'll need someone who will make soup and tell you to sleep when you forget how to do it. He thought of his mother, retired and living in a small condo in Tacoma, where the carpet had been replaced, not because it needed replacing, but because the HOA had finally approved a budget for what they'd call modernization. He hadn't gone to visit enough. He hadn't done a lot of things enough. But he could call her. He could start there. As he stood to leave, Ray added, one more thing. Sloane's lawyers filed a defamation suit yesterday against certain malicious parties, intent on undermining her business. It's vague by design. They'll try to fold Nora into it. We'll preempt them. But that means the fight begins now. Victor nodded, the word fight lighting up something old and useful in him. He left her office into a rain that felt like it could peel you to the truth, and he let it. Sloane Mercer had grown up in Boise with a father who measured love in performance reviews and a mother who sold houses by telling stories about the lives people might live inside them. She came to Seattle for college and stayed for ambition. She liked the city's veneer, earnest, outdoorsy people with expensive fleeces, tech workers with dogs whose Instagram followers outnumbered human friends. Image, Sloane believed, was simply the story your enemies hadn't managed to tell first. Her office overlooked Elliott Bay. The day the suit was filed, she wore a cream blouse and a pencil skirt that announced competence without apology. She stood before the window with a phone in her hand and a plan in her mouth. Her assistant, Kay, a woman with grave eyes and the haunted competence of someone who often cleaned up someone else's genius, hovered with a tablet. 3 outlets, Sloane said, ticking off the plan. 1 lifestyle piece, humanize. 1 business piece, reframe. 1 gossip, trash the sources without sounding like I'm trashing anyone. Lex will send over the defamation language. We'll talk about cyberbullying. We'll talk about how women are held to impossible standards. We will not mention Nora Bennett by name. Kay typed. Should I reschedule your keynote at the AMA luncheon? Sloane glanced at her reflection in the glass. Of course not. I'll look persecuted and then command the room. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lex, her attorney. Filed. Aggressive but clean. You're a damage control paradigm. They'll be reactive. She smiled. She had never lost a narrative she really wanted to win. Victor was the only person who had ever made her want to do something other than win. The first time she'd seen him, he'd been reading notes on a paper napkin, underlining phrases with a pen that didn't write. She'd laughed, he'd looked up, and there had been that moment, the one where she felt, if not loved, then at least seen by someone whose seeing mattered. She had told herself that what she and Victor did was simply an adjustment to reality. He needed someone who understood his world and could move within it without apology. Nora didn't. That the baby complicated things was only true if you believed things needed to be simple. Kay cleared her throat. There's something else, she said. A rumor in the legal Slack groups. Okoye is involved. Sloane's smile disappeared. Ray? She controlled her face. Okoye likes underdogs. She likes to win the moral point with a cinematic flourish. That doesn't make her dangerous. She has a reputation for being meticulous, Kay said. So am I, Sloane murmured. Schedule a meeting with St. Augustine. I want to sit across from Harold and remind him what he owes me. Will do. Kay hesitated. Sloane, there's also chatter about a clinic breach. I wanted you to know before... Before what? Sloane said. The room felt smaller. Before it gets to the board, Kay said. Sloane set her phone down carefully. We don't know what we don't know. Let's keep it that way for one more day. When Kay left, Sloane let her shoulders fall for the length of a single breath. She was not afraid. She was not. She had built her life on the scaffolding of stories told boldly enough that the holes became skylights, but the flash in her spine, cold, electric, told the truth before her mind could discipline it. Somewhere, someone had kept a better ledger than she had. When Nora disappeared, she didn't go far. She caught a lift to a rental car office in Renton and drove south in a compact hatchback that smelled like spearmint and something faintly floral. In the glove compartment, she placed a tiny ceramic sparrow she'd lifted from the windowsill at home, a talisman so small it was almost ridiculous. She drove to Puyallup, to her sister Laurel's craftsman house, with the vegetable garden that had outgrown its borders, and the porch swing that still made the same sound it had when they were kids. A long exhale. Laurel opened the door in a sweatshirt that said, "Ask me about compost," and eyes that said she would take a bullet for the person standing on her mat. "You look like you haven't been sleeping," she said softly, stepping aside. "I keep waking up at 3:30 and thinking I should check if the baby is still inside me," Nora said, managing a laugh that wasn't a laugh, which is both medically unhelpful and philosophically bleak. Laurel hugged her and did not add advice. That was one of Laurel's gifts. She let things be the size they were. She made Nora ginger tea and set a plate of buttered toast on the table like a peace offering to a war no one had declared out loud. "How long can you stay?" Laurel asked. "A few days," Nora said. "Maybe a week. I need to be somewhere that feels like the opposite of being watched." Laurel nodded. "You can have the front room. I'll tell Tony to keep his saxophone practice to daylight hours." Tony, Laurel's husband, was a high school band director with the timing of a saint and a collection of vintage ties he wore with the confidence of a small-town legend. Over the next days, Nora slept, then didn't. She sat on the rug and sorted Laurel's seed packets by month and tried not to check her phone. She wrote in the baby journal about how the baby was the size of a lemon, then a plum, then a small apple, and how she had never in her life thought so much about fruit. Laurel listened. "You don't have to decide everything right now," she said from the doorway, a basket of laundry at her hip. "You can be in the part where all you do is get brave enough to do the next thing. And if the next thing is to eat a popsicle, then that's the next thing." Nora smiled. "You always wanted to be a kindergarten teacher." "I practice on adults," Laurel said. On the third day, Nora drove to a Safeway to buy toothpaste and paper towels and felt, looking at the neon of the freezer aisle, that she might be okay. She texted Ray a single word, "Safe." Ray responded, "We're moving." Victor delivered the drive. Buckle in. On the sixth day, Nora woke to a new sound. The doorbell. Laurel was on a Zoom parent meeting. Tony opened the door. A woman she recognized from years of county newsletters stood on the porch. Sheriff's deputy. She held a paper in a plastic sleeve. "We're serving a notice of suit," the woman said, apologetic. "Defamation. Against a Jane Doe likely to be identified as Nora Bennett." Tony took the paper and thanked the deputy for her work in the heat. He closed the door, turned to Nora with the document and said, "I will never understand why anyone thinks this is a good way to live. It's a tactic," Nora said, the adrenaline hitting her tongue like pennies. "I'm a story she wants to control. She doesn't know I left a different ending." Tony's gaze softened. "You are more than a story, kiddo." That night, Laurel found Nora on the couch, wrapped in a quilt their mother had made, in a season when money was thin and fabric was rich. Nora was holding the ceramic sparrow. "You can stay as long as you need," Laurel said, like she hadn't said it a dozen times. "You can stay forever, or until forever changes shape." Nora leaned her head against Laurel's shoulder. "I might need to go back," she said. "For the court. For me." Laurel squeezed her hand. "I figured," she said. "I already called Mom. She's making soup." Ray filed motions with the efficiency of a woman who knew that paper could be justice if it was cut to the right shape. She sought a temporary restraining order to prevent St. Augustine and Sloan from contacting Nora or accessing her medical records. She filed a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights about the clinic breach. She added a motion to strike the defamation suit as a SLAP action, strategic lawsuit against public participation, aimed at silencing Nora. She attached selected audio clips under seal. The courthouse on Fifth Avenue had the look of all courthouses. Pretend neutral air and marble meant to make you straighten your back. Victor met her at security, wearing a jacket that hung differently on him now, like he'd lost the kind of weight you lose when you forget to be hungry. His mother, Elena Hale, stood beside him in her best church coat. She squeezed his hand. "That woman is a lion," she whispered, nodding toward Ray. "Do what she says." They sat on a wooden bench that had seen 1,000 people discover the boundaries of their own skin. Across the aisle, Sloane sat with Lex. She wore a navy blazer that made her look like the idea of a CEO. She saw Victor and lifted her chin, a small signal meant for one person. He refused it. The judge, Honorable Denise Sharp, read the initial filings as if she never mispronounced anything. "Ms. Okoye, you're seeking a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction related to alleged unlawful access to medical records, additional claims of reputational harm, and an assertion that the defamation lawsuit filed by Ms. Mercer constitutes a SLAPP action. Is that accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ray said. "The evidence supports immediate relief." Lex rose with the grace of a man auditioning for a role he always got. "Your Honor, the narrative is intoxicating, but incomplete. My client has never contacted or authorized anyone to contact any clinic. The materials provided are sensational, and, we believe, illegally obtained. We ask for the SLAPP motion to be denied, the sealed materials to be stricken, and the record to reflect that Ms. Mercer has been the victim of a smear campaign." Judge Sharp's gaze was expectant. "Ms. Okoye," Ray didn't raise her voice, "we don't rely on illegally obtained materials, Your Honor. The audio files were recorded by a party to the conversation. The documents were obtained from a whistleblower within Ms. Mercer's firm, a whistleblower who will testify. We will protect their identity until the appropriate stage. The medical record breach has been confirmed by the clinic. We have chain of custody affidavits. Moreover, this case is precisely what the anti-SLAPP statute exists to prevent: powerful actors using litigation to silence critique." The judge considered, then set the first boundary. "I'm granting a temporary restraining order, prohibiting any direct or indirect contact with Ms. Bennett by Ms. Mercer or agents acting on her behalf. I am also issuing a protective order regarding Ms. Bennett's medical records. The anti-SLAPP motion will be heard in 2 weeks. I will review the sealed filings in camera. In the meantime, counsel for the parties are admonished to restrict public commentary." Outside, cameras waited. Seattle might be a city that preferred its scandals to be about zoning and bike lanes, but it knew star power when it saw it. Ray steered Victor past the microphones. Sloane, catching a reporter's eye, paused just long enough for a photo that would look candid on tomorrow's front page. Her mouth formed a sentence neither Ray nor Victor could hear. "Don't," Ray said without looking at him. "I wasn't going to," Victor lied. That night, Victor went home to a house that still smelled like lemons. He opened his fridge and then closed it again, as if cold air might numbing iron the day. He went to the nursery and sat on the floor. He picked up the stuffed otter and held it like a relic. He spoke aloud. "I'm sorry." The room did not forgive him, but it didn't refuse him either. On his nightstand, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "She's not the woman you think she is." Attached, a photo of Nora walking into Laurel's house, date-stamped. He went cold, then hot. The photo was the shape of a threat. He forwarded it to Ray. Her reply arrived before his stomach finished its drop. "Do not respond. Screenshot. Forward to me. And block. We expected this." He blocked the number and turned off the lamp. The dark felt less like absence than possibility. Kay didn't sleep. She roasted a chicken at midnight because the internet told her the smell of rosemary could soothe nerves, and then ate a drumstick over the sink like a criminal. She had taken the job with Sloane because she wanted to learn from the best. And she had. She had also learned where the best became the worst. She had typed invoices she couldn't defend to her grandmother's ghost. She had scheduled calls with concerned friends to plant stories about women whose only crime was being inconvenient. The day after the hearing, she opened a draft email to Ray and closed it 6 times. On the 7th try, she sent it. "I can help. I have originals. I want a whistleblower counsel, also a therapist recommendation." Ray responded, "Yes to both." 10 a.m. My office. Use the service elevator. Wear something you love. Kay wore a red sweater her aunt had knit. She brought a leather folder and a flash drive. "I didn't record on purpose at first," she said. "I just have meetings on my phone so I can capture action items. But then things..." Her throat closed. "People don't believe you unless you sound like the worst version of yourself." So I kept recording. Ray slid water across the table. "You're doing the brave part," she said. "I'll do the careful part." Kay handed over the folder. "There's one more thing," she said. "Sloan paid a subcontractor to exfiltrate metadata." That's the phrase on the invoice. From Nora's laptop. The subcontractor used a neighbor's open network to get access when Nora was on the porch. I didn't know how to stop it without painting a target. Ray looked like a woman who had found the string that would unravel the sweater. "Do you know who?" Kay took a breath. "A guy named Trent who sits at that WeWork. He thinks he's invisible because he wears hoodies that cost more than my rent." Ray wrote the name down. "Thank you." Kay hesitated at the door. "I'm scared," she said. "Of course you are," Ray said. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to do the next right thing while scared." Kay smiled through her tears. "You sound like my mum," she said. "I sound like my mother too," Ray said. "We should all be so lucky." By the time Kay left, Ray had 3 more motions drafted, and a plan that would, if executed correctly, make the next hearing less about narrative and more about the kind of facts that didn't get softer under lights. The courtroom was fuller. Nora came, her hair tucked into a low bun, a simple navy dress that made her look like she had come to speak her truth, not audition for sympathy. Laurel sat behind her with a bag of trail mix she would never open. Victor, 2 rows back, stared at the back of Nora's neck and thought about how he had once pressed his lips there in the kitchen while pasta boiled, and she had laughed because the water had sputtered onto his arm. Judge Sharp took the bench. "We're here on the anti-slap motion and on defendant's motion to admit certain evidence under seal, including whistleblower testimony and corroborating documents." Lex rose like a man approaching a podium he'd built. "Your Honor, the so-called whistleblower is a disgruntled former employee whose vendetta is obvious and whose materials are contaminated by potential privacy violations. We move to exclude." Ray stood. "Your Honor, the whistleblower is a corroborated witness with direct knowledge. The privacy violations, if any, were committed by the party now claiming privacy as a shield. We seek to admit redacted exhibits and limited audio for the court's in-camera review and for the record, pursuant to the public interest exception." Judge Sharp leaned forward. "We'll proceed. Ms. Okoye, call your witness." Kay walked to the stand in her red sweater. She was sworn in, her voice steady on the "So help me God." Ray led gently. "What is your position, Ms. Mendoza?" "Executive assistant to Ms. Mercer," Kay said. "I've worked in PR for 9 years. Did you observe or participate in efforts to access Ms. Bennett's medical records?" Kay blinked. "I never accessed anything myself. I scheduled calls, I saw invoices, I recorded meetings to capture tasks. I brought the invoices and recordings because the tasks were wrong. Describe wrong. Paying a contractor to exfiltrate metadata from a private citizen's laptop without consent. Coordinating with a clinic employee to review appointment logs and sonogram dates. Compiling a list of friends to express concern in the media about Ms. Bennett's mental health, to undermine her if she made claims. Did Ms. Mercer direct these actions? Yes. Do you have documentation? Yes, Kay said. And Ray began the meticulous work of scaffolding, entering exhibits with care, redacting names that did not need to be burned to light this room, playing 30 seconds of audio where Sloane's voice, low and smoky, said, "The thing about pregnancy is it makes the targets more visible. You tap the target, you watch who flinches." Lex objected. "Out of context." "Context," Ray said, "is what we will provide." Judge Sharp overruled. "Continue." The exhibits unfolded like a paper city. Invoices, emails, calendar invites that read like lockpicks. Ray called the clinic's compliance officer, who testified that a nurse, since terminated, had accessed Nora's records without authorization. She called a forensic analyst who tied the IP addresses to the WeWork and to Trent's laptop. She played a clip of Sloane instructing, in careful tones, that anything dicey be routed through subcontractors. She offered the court the shadow ledger that tied payments to St. Augustine approvals. Lex tried to puncture. "Ms. Mendoza, you're angry with Ms. Mercer." "Yes," Kay said. "I am. And anger can distort memory." "Not documents," Kay said. Lex turned to the judge. "Your Honor." "Counsel," Judge Sharp said, not unkindly. "The record speaks. I'll hear closing arguments on the anti-slap motion and on the preliminary injunction." Ray spoke last. "This case isn't about gossip," she said. "It's about power. About whether people who have it get to reorder the lives of those who don't, and then call the resulting chaos narrative. Ms. Bennett is pregnant. She is entitled to safety. She is entitled to a life where her private medical information is not weaponized. The law protects her. The truth, eventually, protects all of us." Judge Sharp ruled 2 days later. The anti-slap motion was granted. Sloane's suit was dismissed with attorney's fees. A preliminary injunction was issued against Sloane and St. Augustine to prevent further harassment or contact. The sealed materials were kept under protective order, but recognized as credible. The matter of criminal charges was referred to the county prosecutor. On the courthouse steps, reporters surged. Ray gave a 3-sentence statement and stepped away. Sloane, jaw set, looked at the cameras as if they were a jury she might still charm. Victor watched Nora lift her chin, her hand at her abdomen, and he thought, "We might survive this." Redemption, Nora decided, wasn't a light switch. It was a series of small lamps turned on in rooms you'd been too shaken to enter. She went back to the house with Victor on a day when the water was stretched tight over the lake and the wind was busy elsewhere. They walked through each room quietly, like tourists in the museum of their mistakes. "I wanted to hate you," Nora said in the kitchen, fingers on the cool stone where her ring had sat. "It would be easier." "I deserve it," Victor said. "You deserve to do better," she said. "But that's not the same as deserving me," he exhaled. "I know." They talked for hours in sentences that didn't pretend there were easy absolutions. He told her things she had suspected and things she hadn't, the loneliness that had felt justified by success, the way Sloane had made his bad choices sound like strategic moves. She told him about the mornings she had woken angry at the light, about the way women at parties had made her feel like she'd failed an exam she hadn't signed up to take. "We can co-parent," Nora said, the words clear and kind. "We can be good at that." Victor nodded. "I will be the kind of father who goes to every appointment and knows the names of every stuffed animal, and who doesn't build a fortress around himself and call it home." He moved into a rental nearby and joined a men's group he would once have mocked. He started therapy with a man who wore sweaters and asked slow questions that made fast answers feel embarrassing. He called his mother and let her bring soup without performing gratitude. At Halcyon, he stepped back from certain deals and forward into the kind of governance he had always argued for on panels, and then punctured in practice. He resigned from the St. Augustine Advisory Board. He wrote an op-ed about anti-slap abuses and signed it with his full name. Sloane went quiet. A plea deal surfaced months later, a fine, probation, professional censure. She lost her biggest accounts. She started a podcast about resilience. In the first episode, she said, "When you've been cancelled, you have a choice: disappear or redefine." People argued in the comments about whether accountability and cancellation were the same thing. Nora didn't listen. Kay took a job with a non-profit that supported whistleblowers. She sent Nora a baby blanket with a note: "For a child who will grow up in a home where truth doesn't have to be rehearsed." Ray and her wife, Liv, came to the baby shower and brought board books shaped like fruit. At 38 weeks, Nora went into labor. It was early morning. The world was the color of steel. Laurel drove, Victor in the back seat with his hand on Nora's shoulder, the ceramic sparrow in Nora's pocket. In the delivery room, nurses moved like choreography. Victor counted her breaths out loud until she told him to count silently. He cried when their son arrived, all noise and promise and small hands that flailed like he was trying to fly wherever his voice could take him. They named him Jonah. He slept with his mouth in a perfect O. He smelled like milk and the oldest story in the world. In the weeks that followed, life wrinkled and then smoothed. There were bad nights when the house felt like a ship, and they were sailors whose maps had gotten wet. There were good mornings when the coffee was strong, and the baby lay on Victor's chest, and the lake, visible through the slider, shrugged off fog like a shawl. One afternoon, Nora stood at the kitchen island, the flash drive cupped in her palm. It had done its work. She could put it in a drawer and call it a relic. She did, in the drawer where the long lighter lived, and the extra rubber bands multiplied like rabbits. She put her ring beside it, not as a rebuke, but as an artifact of a girl who had trusted the gleam. When Jonah was 2 months old, they took him to Discovery Park. The sun made everything honest. Laurel and Tony came with sandwiches. Kay arrived with a kite. Ray and Liv spread a blanket in the long grass, like an invitation that had always been waiting. Victor lifted Jonah onto his shoulder, and the baby cooed into a world that, despite everything, had not given up on being beautiful. Nora watched her son's eyes follow the kite's color. She felt the shape of her own heart settle. She wasn't naive. Power still tilted rooms. People still weaponized stories. But her story had resisted. The lamps were on. She turned to Victor. "You're doing the work." He looked at Jonah, at her, at the life, unpolished now, and precisely for that reason, real. "I want to keep doing it," he said. "Even if it never gets me what I wish it would." She nodded. "That's what makes it real." They walked to the bluff. The kite tugged at its string like a secret that wanted to be told, but could wait. The wind held. "If you made it here, thank you for walking through this story with Nora, Victor, and Jonah. Their missteps, their courage, and the quiet lamps they turned on one by one." Pregnant wife disappears, leaves a flash drive that destroys mistress in court, is a reminder that truth isn't tidy. Power can tilt the floor beneath us, and redemption is a choice repeated in small, ordinary rooms. If this resonated with you, if you've ever rebuilt after a betrayal, set a boundary, or chosen to believe your life could feel honest again, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps more women find stories that respect their strength and complexity. Tell us in the comments what part hit home for you or what you'd like to see next. Until then, be gentle with yourselves and keep the lamps on.